would like to introduce our first speaker, Ian, who is a BFA student.
Hey everyone. So the project that I have created is entitled Divine Madness. A little backstory or a little information about me before I begin. My name is Ian Henderson. I'm an artist from Taos, New Mexico. Studied artistic anatomy, which is drawing the human form and creatures for about 9 years, which then propelled me into the game track at Parsons and interested in VFX. If you're interested to see more of my work, please check out my website. Anyway, the thesis project that I've created serves as an ongoing exploration into what makes an environment cohesive while giving the impression of a narrative. The project itself is in the form of a medieval library asset package, utilizing custom 3D models, textures, thus allowing for other artists to create their own variation of the medieval theme using the assets that I've created. A little backstory into the title itself, going off of Plato's Phaedrus, he uses the term divine madness to describe indescribable emotional passions such as beauty, love, wisdom. Thus, I came up with the title Divine Madness in reference to desire or pursuit for knowledge. And the backstory for this whole project is that scholars would come to the library in order to gain a sense of knowledge and elevate their faculties of mind. Unfortunately, as they continue to delve into the reaches of the library, they start to go mad themselves. In order to begin this process of creating the asset package, I first had to go into looking at how asset packages are created, and the main theme that was consistent in all asset packages that I found on YouTube, as well as other from other artists, was that all the asset packages have to be cohesive. Basically, same style, same general theme, so they all create essentially a narrative. Although the assets themselves don't really have a sense of personality. It's more once everything's grouped together that they form a story that's basically implicit. And then I'm going into the prototyping. I started out creating a whole bunch of textures, different objects, kind of messing around and getting a feel for how to make an environment and what story to tell in an environment. And some things that I had to keep in mind were that basically the asset package themselves, they all have to have a central theme. Since I'm sticking with the medieval theme, I was trying to incorporate various arches and very stone-like structures. Main component of asset packages is that they are modular. The different objects within the asset package itself are designed in order to be moved around and not deform when you're moving around. Therefore, the mesh itself, the mesh of the object itself, although it doesn't seem super complex, is actually very, very important so that everything looks okay, especially for cinematics or other game assets or games such as Call of Duty. Going into more of my asset, this is just a brief scope of the different assets that I had to create and the different prototyping steps that I had to go through to create the final scene. And for the final reveal, these are the final results. A full library asset with different characters. The blue people in the scene themselves are reference heights for people so that I can give a sense of where people are in relation to the rest of the environment. And keeping in mind, everything is kind of going towards a medieval theme, while at the same time allowing for some artistic expression, such as the columns, and trying to make everything as cohesive to give the general impression of a library. And thus that ends the exploration of basically that the asset themselves is not as important as the collective whole. The combination of all them create the final piece. I hope you enjoyed my project, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that awesome presentation, Ian. Our next presenter will be Zihao, an MFA student. Zihao, an MFA student.
Hello everyone, my name is Zihao. I'm a creative tech designer and engineer, graduated from Parsons MFA Design Technology. Please check out my works on my website. So for my thesis, I built an agent-based simulation of interfacing machines with autonomous behavior. It is basically a game that people can play with this automata and build stuffs. But not only the players, the automata also have the abilities as we do. So here is a little demo of how people interact with this automata and activate them. And these interfaces can also assemble themselves. So why I started this project? Back in 1991, computer scientist Mark Weiser published an article of his imagination about 21st century. He imagined a person living in our time and she is using a pen to cite from the newspaper. As soon as she draws out the paper, the pen messages the paper asking it to send that citation to her office. This kind of thing was referred to as ubiquitous computing by Mark Weiser. Now in 21st century, we have the Internet of Things, which basically stick to the same idea that objects around us have a computer embedded and can also communicate to each other. A more interesting example I found is this Wi-Fi password sharing function on iOS. This gives me a strange feel that these devices know others around them and talk to each other under the surface. Not likely having AI in this function, but they have the autonomous behavior to react to other iOS devices' presence. So I start to question how well this kind of thing, like machines and interfaces with autonomous behaviors, influence our experience. And do people feel the same way as I did? In terms of autonomous behavior, I was primarily inspired by Conway's Game of Life. It is a zero-player game where players only set up initial conditions and the game just keeps rolling by itself. It happens on an infinite 2D grid. Each cell on this grid following a certain set of rules. There are two things amazing about this game. The first one is that it mimics the rules of living creatures that gives you an organic feel. The other one is that although it looks meaningless at first, but the system has enormous possibilities. If you master the rules, you can even use it to make a digital clock. Unfortunately, we lost this legendary mathematician in this pandemic. May he rest in peace. One of the reasons it is so versatile is that it is a cellular automaton that each cell or agent has its own ability to react to its surroundings. We can think this as a bottom-up process, where each least elementary entity can act on their own. In comparison with the top-down process, for example, if we want to get a clock, you can get one, but it can only be a clock and nothing else. In real world, there are examples of this bottom-up design thinking. Lego will be one of the most famous examples. Its Lego block has simple form, but when they come together, they can build up many things from toys to a durable car. And in tech, there are also modular devices taking on this kind of thinking, like Palette, to meet different needs from people. It is also important to mention the idea of system and agents have been used a lot in video games. In Zelda the Breath of Wild, basically everything is interactable, not only by the players, but also by other agents, which forms a large system and makes people immerse into the game world. In simulation games, the use of modularity also expands the gameplays can be developed by the players. For example, in Besiege, players can use simple mechanical parts to build almost any kind of machines. For this precedent, I decided to make a game-like simulation to investigate interfacing machines with autonomous behaviors. I designed 8 types of interface automata. Each one has its unique function. I also designed the rules that each interface automaton will follow. There are 3 rules. The first one is life. Each interface has a parameter called usefulness that will keep decreasing if no one interacts with it. When the usefulness comes down to 0, the automaton will disappear. The second one is self-activation, which is also one of the autonomous behaviors. Each interface will operate itself in a certain frequency, and they have different functions in activation. Like when a push button is activated, its cap will extrude. The third one is merge ability. When conditions are met, two automata will merge with each other and form a new one. Imagine like Lego blocks can assemble themselves without human intervention. The merged automata will follow the input-output pair. For example, when the input is activated, it will also activate its output automata. In this way, the activation signal will passing down to the last output, just like a nerve system. On top of these rules, human users can also do all of them, like manually activating the automata and merging them. Players can also choose to spawn whichever the automata they want. I also add this future UI to allow players to get more controls over how to spawn each element, while maintaining the agency in each automaton. And here are examples of spawning automata through the UI and waving at the actual camera. While everything is developed, things are getting interesting. Normally an interface would automatically disappear if no one activates it, but because light and speaker interface can activate others in the distance, there could be feedback loops formed to keep activating each other forever, and they will never disappear. Also, when the actuation and automata merge together, they actually acquire the ability to move across the space. And here are some other examples of the gameplay. On the left, there is a light panel that can form a pattern in activation. The other one is a robot I tried to build. In the process, I just build the thing as the game goes, and in the same time, this automata also merge and form new structures, which I consider as a collaboration between us. During the testing, although people find it's hard to get started, the difficulty also motivates people to figure out the rules and continue the gameplay, and in this process, people can feel the agency in each entity in the simulation. As the machines are getting agencies and bringing us benefits, they also take away humans' privilege to interact, even for simple things like pressing a button. And you have to learn their rules very well in order to know why they exhibit the behaviors. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to introduce Wendi, an MFA student.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today in our online festival event. Right now, I want to share with you my thesis project. So my thesis project is called IFU, and it's a virtual immersive storytelling space that leads to a story behind the pink jacket. It critiques current society for embracing fast fashion culture and the vicious cycle of consumer shopping behavior. In Chinese, Yifu means clothes. Coincidentally, in the same pronunciation, Yifu means attachment. From Yifu to Yifu, it suggests a liaison between the two vocabularies. The physical action of wearing clothes may lead to an internal transformation in having a special relationship with the item itself. Yifu to Yifu, this process adds value to our clothing by creating collective memories. And the memory that I want to share with you today is behind my mom's pink jacket. Walking into the exhibition space, a collective photo or display on the wall. The images are included are historical evidence from my mom's generation and are memories to many. In 1990s China, clothes were still limited, and the imported pieces were considered a rarity. In Beijing, there was a department store called Baking Friendship Store. In the beginning, when the department store opened in the 60s, They only welcome foreigners, diplomats, and Chinese from overseas. In later years, even after the entry criteria changed, people will still need to use a foreign exchange certificate to purchase items inside. In the 1990s, my mom was a college graduate and just started working at a foreign company at the time. Her salary was only 200 yuan, which was equivalent to $30, and 10 yuan of the foreign exchange certificate. So each month she could save herself the 10 yuan of the certificate, which was equivalent to $1. Finally, one day, she kept enough savings of the certificate to purchase this pink jacket from the department store as a first employment gift to herself. Growing up in Beijing, she remembers that being a child and an elder sister, she would wear a pair of trousers and then pass it to her little brother. In times of material scarcity, of course, having a full meal was the most important thing comparing to having nice clothes. However, nowadays, it's hard for most of our generation to experience the same amount of contentment or gratification over a piece of clothing as my mother did in those times. It's also hard for our generation to imagine the scarcity of goods when we were born in a peaceful time with abundant resources. It's also hard to carry a clothing item for so long that even the color faded, we still wouldn't throw it away. In our current society, we're constantly influenced by peer pressure, bloggers, and social media, so much that our closet is flooded with outside opinions. The internal values that clothes can bring to us are fading away. According to McKinsey report, in 2018, the average American bought around 64 to 68 new pieces of clothing per year, which is about 5 times more than in 1980. On average, each piece will be worn only 7 times before it gets tossed. This behavior creates a huge amount of pollution and brings the fashion industry to the second highest polluting industry in the world. Our clothes gain sentimental value as we wear them, and it fosters companionship between the item itself and its owner. Together, it creates memories. This is the true value behind Yifu, and this is the Yifu. If clothes could talk, what would they say? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And now I'd like to present Yashwanth, an MFA student.
Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to our virtual thesis show. I hope you're all safe and doing well amidst this crisis. I'm Yashwanth and I'm an MFA Design and Technology student, and I'm going to talk about my project, Sanctum. My background was in mechanical engineering, where most of my focus was on solving problems and developing products for industrial usage. Now I transitioned to creative technologist, where my work focuses on exploring human and spatial interactions. During my time at DT, I worked on projects that mostly fall under the categories of exploring body movements, 3D spaces, and user interactions. I came upon this really fascinating project called V-Motion Project, where music was made through body movements. This project inspired me and made me rethink of how our bodies can be used as an interface for interaction design. Tying my background in problem-solving, interests in spatial computing, and curiosity in body motion interactions, I wanted to work on a practical real-life problem. So I chose to work in fitness domain because of my personal involvement and pain points with exercising, and also the fact that fitness involves a lot of body movements. So I went around fitness centers in New York City, spoke to some personal trainers and gym members. I found out that trainer to gym member ratio is very low, and it is expensive to afford a personal trainer here. Also, the beginners feel gyms are an overwhelming experience to start off. That made me come up with the design question of how can I create an intervention that would provide beginners a comfortable environment for learning and performing exercises at gyms. I wanted to focus on muscle workouts because I relate to a personal problem of not being able to achieve results with consistent training, and I'm sure there are other people out there facing similar issues. And so I created an interactive visual interface system that would allow beginners at the gym to learn and perform muscle workout exercises in an effective manner. Here is the trailer of the product. Now I'll take you through the process of how this was achieved. Since I'm creating an intervention for muscle workouts, it is important to know the science behind what makes an effective workout. There are many subtle things which people often miss out while performing exercises. Research says that hypertrophy, breathing intervals, repetition duration, range of motion, progressive overload, and body form are some of the important aspects to consider while doing strength training for muscle growth. Hypertrophy is the amount of stress you provide for the muscle to tear. Generally, the last rep matters the most for this phenomenon to occur. In terms of breathing, inhaling and exhaling patterns during exercises are important to maintain blood pressure. Repetition duration and range of motion are essential for providing quality of stress to your muscle. Progressive overload is necessary to increase your muscle stress threshold and not reach plateau. And finally, maintaining body posture and form is vital to avoid injuries during exercises. So I wanted to create visual interpretations of these aspects, and so I made few prototypes. The first one is to test hypertrophy and repetition count. The second one is to test for repetition duration. The third one is for breathing practice, and the fourth one is to check for body form correction. I used physical computing and game-like visuals to create these simulated experiences. User testing these prototypes yielded positive results as the users were able to follow the visuals and did necessary actions intuitively. Now the next step in my process was to combine all these layers and create a single coherent experience that could intuitively guide the users to follow all the aspects without confusion, and so I made a scene in Unity, bringing together all these visual layers. After user testing, the feedback was that the interface felt monotonous. Since this experience requires a longer time involvement, I had to make it more dynamic and immersive, and so I built a whole virtual ecosystem around this product where it falls under three categories of 3D world design, technological choices, and user experience. For the world design, I did level design in Unity and created a forest environment. The idea behind this is to bring a sense of calmness and focus to the user while performing these exercises. Muscle workouts, unlike fat-burning workouts, needs to be done at a slower, controlled pace and with concentration, hence the forest and meditative theme. In terms of technology, there are two aspects. One is the virtual trainer, which replicates the movements of a certified trainer captured in Motion Capture Studio, and the other is the user, the motion of which is captured using Kinect skeletal tracking in real time. Pose estimation and gesture recognition algorithms are used to tally these data points and provide real-time feedback during the experience. In terms of user experience, there are three folds to it. The first one is instructional design. Since this project is about learning exercises, I am using Kim's model of instructional design to create a step-by-step instructions for teaching the user about exercises during the experience. And the second part is the user interactions. I used game design principles to create visual cues and feedback mechanisms that are intuitive for users to follow. The third and final part is the sound design. In order to add an extra layer of immersion, audio feedback is also added that complements the visual experience. So these are the final renderings of how the experience looks like. For the future scope, I imagine the system to exist in the gyms with different stakeholders involved. But given the current pandemic situation, there is a demand for in-house experience, and I foresee with advancement in portable motion capture technologies and machine learning, the system can independently exist by itself and provide personalized experiences for users. And finally, stay strong and stay healthy. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to thank my advisors, Harpreet and Larata, for pushing me to achieve this feat. Also, I would like to thank faculty Kyle, Jessica, and Andrew, and my friends Karen, Akshansh, Akanksha, Vishal, Bhavik, Sweksha, and Carolina for emotionally supporting me and guiding me throughout this project.
Thank you so much. And our next presenter is Yue, an MFA student.
Hello, everyone. Let me start the present. Hello, everyone. I'm Yue, and my project is called Snailor, a playful walking experience. I'm really glad having you all to participate and listen to my thesis presentation today. A little bit about me. I'm an international student from Beijing, China, and I came to here right after my undergrad. At the beginning, I was amazed by the city, and then gradually I felt stressful when I walking in the city. So after interviewing several people, I realized it was not only my problem. As international students, we encounter culture shock, English as second language, stress of study. The unfamiliar and complicated in New York City actually make us feel unsafe and overwhelming in addition. It is really easy for international students to stay at home and avoid going outside. So I started build Snailor for my thesis. My inspiration of this project came from a walk from a subway station to my campus. I was following the instruction of Google Maps on the road. My eyes were focusing on the map all the time, just to make sure I'm on the right path and didn't miss any crossroad. Suddenly, I started to think why I have to follow this direction. It always showed the same route, which is the fastest path. However, there were so many different possibilities between the two places that I can explore if I'm not in a rush. What if I can make an unreliable and imprecise navigation tool instead of this one? And this is my first prototype. My friend and I were basically wandering around our school without any plan. We found fun places such as this children's bookstore and also this coffee shop that had a garden for enjoying sunshine. They were really close to our campus, but I had never been. Their experience was memorable and inspiring for me. I started to think, what if the urban space is not only made of unfamiliar buildings and strangers, but also more like a fun playground that can be explored and investigated. So here's the Snailor. Snailor is a playful walking experience that helps international students to build place attachment to New York City. It allows players to focus on the surrounding environment. Players can feel safe and supported, and it can create maps that only matters to the player themselves. So I want to say why it is called Snailor. I combined the snail and sailor, these two characters. A snail moves really slow and close to the ground. When encounter dangers, it will go back to its shell, but they will always come back and keep moving. A sailor is someone always navigate into unknown areas bravely. I combined those two characters to imply that new international students are allowed to move slow, but they will still keep moving with fun and determination. So here's a small trailer for Snailor. Okay, that's the trailer, and I'd like to explain several functions of Snailor. The first one is put on the shell of Snailor. The shell is made of paper, and it can actually prevent people from keep looking at their phone on their way to different places, but also allow people to use and interact with Snailor's interfaces. The second one is get the direction. The direction is not like traditional directions like north or south, but more like random prompts such as this one. Attention, look for the direction that has manhole covers. If you follow that instruction and then look around, you may find this, or this, and even this, delicious. My idea of this function actually came from the theory of modernology and street observation from Japan designers. They actually turn modern society and street into studies. They want to study those areas just like archaeologists, and they really provided a lot of different perspectives of looking at urban spaces differently. And next function is mark with photos. This one allows players to mark places or objects that is interesting or matters to them. And then they can save it to the archive, or they can visit those places in the future. And finally, they can get an unreliable map. It's not about the precise geography of the city, but more like the mental image of the city. If they collect more of these maps, maybe players can get a sense of achievement and get the motivation to explore more. So by turning a multiple function mobile phone into a single function investigation tool, the player can explore the urban environment as a real adventure. Snailor provides opportunities and motivation for new international students to become autonomous, to care more, and get involved more in the city. Although It's designed for a specific group of people, but it can actually be used by anyone at anywhere. Even during these times, the cities become unfamiliar to a lot of people. But I just want to say we can be slow, we can be confused, and then we can be brave to face and adapt to the changing environment, just as Snailors. And thank you. Thank you to a lot of people who helped me, including Colleen's class and also my family and my friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I love snails. Okay, and now I'd like to present our final student presenter for this session, Yanzhe.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Yanzhe Wu, and you can call me Yan. I'm going to talk about my thesis project called Canada Goose Origin. Canada Goose Origin is a VR goose role-playing game, which means you play as a goose in the game, going through a story of adventure. The experience invites people to think about the relationship between humans and other species in cities, especially during urbanization. And first of all, let's have a look of the video. Okay, so why did I choose Canada Goose? When I was doing research, I was inspired by the history that Canada Goose changed their habit from migratory geese to resident geese 100 years ago because of humans' activities. At that time, some geese were released by some humans who had taken them as pets. Because they were pets for a long time, they lost the habit of migrating. After the geese became resident in New York City, they grew extremely fast and caused many problems to humans. Like they pooped everywhere, ate grass in parks and golf courses, caused economic influences. The government decided to take action in 2009 when a jet plane crashed on the Hudson River because it sucked two geese into its engine. The government came up with different methods to control the population of Canada goose in New York City and wiped out a portion of them. However, after several weeks from that accident, a research showed that the geese who caused the plane crash were actually normal migratory geese. But the accident drew the government's attention to the resident geese in New York City. Because I was interested in immersive technologies, I wondered if I could an Oculus Quest as my platform. So in the context of the Canada Goose, here comes the design questions. How can we convey the idea in VR? How to make people feel inspiring as well as playful in VR? What interactions should people have in the experience? These questions are what this project is trying to explore. Now I'm going to talk about the narrative of Canada Goose Origin. The narrative follows the structure, orientation, crisis, escalation, discovery, and change. This is a normal narrative structure, but in general, the game consists of three parts. Orientation, funding newspaper mission, and static investigation. Each part plays a certain role in the experience to gradually reveal the mystery in the virtual world. In the orientation part, the player has a mission of fixing their broken nest. In the process, the player will talk to his partner called Aridus, and players need to walk around the area and collect some twigs and mud. The purpose of the orientation is to help the player to get familiar with the environment and learn how to move, how to have conversations with characters, and how to interact with objects. As you can see, there are visual indicators and instruction text leading the player to learn and complete the mission. After the player fixes the nest, they will find that the partner Aridus is missing, which leads to the next part. In the second part, the player will meet with another character called Joseph, who is a goose with the greatest wisdom in the park. Joseph will tell the player that there are many geese that went missing recently and ask the player to find a newspaper to acquire more information. As you can see, the player will not have visual indicators in this part now because they need to explore and observe in the game. After took the newspaper, Joseph will read the newspaper and ask the player to investigate a statue built recently, which leads to the third part. The statue is on a little island where the player will find the partner Aridus. It turns out that Aridus was caught by some park staff, but luckily she escaped. After the player found Aridus, Joseph came and checked the statue. He will tell the truth that humans are trying to wipe out all the geese in the park, and they need to leave. However, players just fix their nest and have eggs to protect. In the end, players have three choices to make. First one, live with Aridus. Second one, stay to protect their eggs and ask Joseph to take care of Aridus. And third one, stay with Aridus to protect the eggs. As the narrative becomes more and more complete, the world building is changed in order to lead players to go through the story. This is the final park landscape of the game. As you can see, the game area is restricted by some brushes or obstacles. Players will be guided to explore all the areas. All right, this is my project, thesis project, Canada Goose Origin. Thanks to all the audiences who are listening. Thanks to my parents, and thanks to Jesse, Sven, Jessica, Loretta, Kyle, Askwa, and all the DT fellow students for all the support. I sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you everyone for your really awesome presentations. And now I'm going to start the Q&A session, which is going to be moderated by Dr. Micha Cárdenas. She is an assistant professor of games and playable media, digital arts and new media, and critical race and ethnic studies at UC Santa Cruz. She is an artist/theorist who works in augmented reality, digital performance, and trans of color poetics. Her book, Poetic Operations, Trans of Color Art and Digital Media, is forthcoming from Duke University Press. And with that, I'd like to start the Q&A session.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, so, sorry, I just have a question. So, how many? I'm going to give feedback to all the projects, right? How many minutes do I have to do that, Dahee?
Until like 7:15-ish.
Yeah, you got 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, 15. Okay.
Yeah,
and then the Q&A, and then other people have a chance to ask questions. Is that the Q&A session?
Yeah, we have a little time, so I can if we have a little more time, I can ask people to ask their questions.
Okay, great. Awesome. Just getting my bearings. Wow. Okay. I mean, such beautiful projects. I mean, I'm so impressed with all these projects, and really honored to be asked to respond to them because they were beautiful and compelling, and really every single one of you should just be applauded so hugely for accomplishing this in this really difficult time. I mean, you've really accomplished something amazing. So I'm just going to go in order because I have all these notes in order, and hopefully I have some useful feedback. So Ian's project, Define Madness. So I did get a chance to look at the website and see most of these projects ahead of time, but I really appreciated the presentations of them as well. So yeah, I really like this project. I mean, it's a really impressive amount of detail, and like the architecture that you put in there is also really compelling. As somebody who doesn't know how to do 3D modeling or doesn't really do the kind of hands-on 3D modeling, it's quite impressive. I really like the cleverness of the self-referential library, or like a library of assets to make a library. I think is a funny and interesting gesture. And so I did have some questions. I mean, okay, so my initial question is why, so in the narrative of the project, there's like the scholars lead to madness, study leads to madness, which is funny and interesting comment on academia. But why does that happen? Like some more bridging of that narrative would help. And I mean, when I think about madness, immediately I think about disability studies and all of the critiques of madness, and even the like mad pride movement. So in the story, what comes up for me is why does study lead to madness, and what's the place of madness in the study story, and how could disability studies help us think more critically about madness? I guess the last question I had was, where do we see the madness in the library? Not just for the people in the library, but, you know, when I think about divine madness in a library, I think about Jorge Luis Borges, or Borges's Library of Babel. And, you know, I think you could bring more madness to the actual structure of the library. Yes, this is for Ian. So I think you could bring more madness into the actual structure and the visuals in the library. But overall, really great job. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so the next project was Zihao's project, the interface automata. And somebody said in the chat that it was beautiful. I absolutely agree. I mean, wow. The use of light, the background, the way the movement goes, the way the objects come together. I mean, the animation, the modeling, the visuals were very beautiful. So that was impressive. I'm going to talk about my project, which is a digital I really very much appreciate your thinking about bottom-up structures. The analysis was really interesting, and the Legos was such a good example. And then taking that from Legos to Internet of Things, I think was really interesting move as well. And so you talked about 8 types and 3 different rules. I don't think I got what that. I didn't have the time to write down what all the 8 types were, but the rules were interesting. And as you were describing that, it made me want to talk about assemblage theory in Deleuze and Manuel Delanda's work. So I think that might be an interesting reference to look at to keep going with this project. You know, Gilles Deleuze talked about assemblages of machines as having 2 different dimensions of communication between the parts. And my brain is in quarantine and I can't remember the other dimension of Deleuze's assemblages, but I think assemblage theory really comes to mind when looking at this project. So the images you showed the way some of the parts were merging together in this really interesting and, you know, like automata, in this really interesting organic way, which I think raised some really exciting possibilities of thinking about organic user interfaces versus clean user interfaces. So the rules that you laid out around, you know, certain interface objects disappearing if they're not used over time was really interesting, a way of thinking about futures of designing interfaces if they're going to be visual interfaces. So yeah, again, I just want to applaud you for a really impressive project, and I love to see where it goes, and to see how thinking about assemblages as a way of thinking and thinking about everything as assemblages could maybe expand the thinking in your project or help you refine the different types and different rules. Okay, so Wendy's project Yifu is critiquing fast fashion. So I think a really timely and important project. And again, very beautiful. I really appreciate the last question about what would clothes say if they could speak, and taking this one object of clothing of the your mother's pink jacket, and then articulating this beautiful story of migration and technology and economics that all come together in the image of this one pink jacket. I'm really surprised about that statistic that you shared about 64 pieces of clothing worn 7 times. I mean, strange and disappointing statistic. I would love to see the source of that and know more about that. But that question of fast fashion, I think really we can really reconsider in this moment. So you talked about our generation or your generation being unfamiliar with a scarcity of goods. And I think that is a really important question to be engaging right now during the pandemic and COVID-19. And how might we use this moment as an opportunity to transform society in positive ways? And how might this scarcity of goods that a lot of us are experiencing now be transformed into an experience that might lead to more sustainability? And I think that creating that narrative that you're putting forward in the game is really very, very important. So yeah, thank you so much for a really timely and beautiful, personal, important piece. Okay. So Yashwanth, the Muscle Sanctum project. I found this project really interesting. And oh yes, you're welcome, Wendy. Y'all should feel free to respond to me over email. I don't know if you have a chance to respond during this time in this meeting. But Yashwanth, the Muscle Sanctum project, again, the visuals were very beautiful. I mean, really an impressive technical achievement. I see the really interesting combination of taking a design challenge that you really do personally, and then studying the existing literature and the science and doing user testing, and then coming up with a really interesting and novel scenario for people to get healthy and stay healthy and build muscle in. So yeah, really impressive achievement. And, I think, as you said in your last words in the presentation, stay strong, stay healthy, right? It's really relevant and important question for us right now is how to do that, maybe with VR or how to do that at home in general, right? We might not have access to trainers. So questions that I often have when I look at design projects are, who's the audience? And I always really encourage my my design students to think about specific audiences. If you maybe to develop personas, like multiple different personas. I don't know if you did that, but to think about designing for a range of races and genders and maybe ages and abilities. If you want to define a really specific and narrow audience, that's fine. You can totally go in that direction, but I just want that to be stated because it felt a bit like designed for people just like you, which is okay, and that's often a good first step to go with design. But then beyond that, to think about personas for the audiences that you might want to reach. I did think, I felt like the correction feedback felt like it didn't fit in the environment. And I know it's important to give people like timely feedback that they'll respond to, but I felt like, okay, here we are, we're in the forest. And then, you know, the correction feedback felt more of like a prototype part. Like it could have been smoother or cleaner or more well integrated. And I mean, even that could be its own whole really interesting exploration of like how to give correction in a way that fits, that's not so jarring, or that fits into this larger scene you've created of building, you know, emotional health alongside physical health. Yeah, so I think that, you know, the Connect is a really important example of thinking about having different kinds of users that you're testing with. So I did want to hear more about like who were the kinds of users that you tested with. And I guess the last question that I have is like in thinking about audience, that would help you differentiate the project from how it's different from like Wii Fitness or the Switch games for fitness. And you know, I haven't done like a good market study of those, but I think there's a lot of room for fitness apps for people with non-normative bodies and genders, and there's lots of reasons why gyms can be really bad experiences for a lot of people. So I think there's a lot of room for your project to reach a lot of people.
Thank you. Can I answer those questions? Is that?
I think I only have 3 more minutes, so let me finish the 2 feedbacks.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go a couple minutes over, I think. So yes, UI Snailor project. I did see this on the website, and I really love this project. It's great. I really appreciate the cute UI. I wish I just had more of that in my life in general. Also, I think really timely and relevant when we're dealing with UIs. We're dealing with user interfaces at every moment in, okay, thanks, Allison. When we're even more dealing with UI, user interface in our every moment, it becomes, I think, even more important to have designs for UIs that can be gentle and that can be, you know, playful. I really appreciate the psychogeography idea. I teach psychogeography to a lot of my students. So I think that it's a great design technique and just a great way to come up with ideas. I also think that in general that we need more slow and playful technology. So that combination that you came up with there in the Snailor idea, I think is really great. So the I think also the idea of putting on a paper shell on the phone is a really good idea to limit the amount of functionality, and goes with the overall concept, right, of having a UI that can be more more gentle, or more, I don't know, softer, or I don't know, maybe healthier or something. So yeah, the paper shell is really interesting. I would, and the idea of modernology was really fascinating. I had never heard that term before, so I really appreciate hearing about it. I think that I would encourage you to look at other locative media artists. So there is a group that made a random urban hikes app as media art, and I sadly cannot remember their name right now. I know they showed it in Los Angeles, so maybe the name will come to me. But they're a locative media ecological art group thinking about random urban hikes. But I still feel like your unique take on it, which is, you know, this playful design take on it, is really important in terms of like the need that we have to work towards technology that's more sustainable in an emotional way. So, you know, reducing functions on the phone, I think, is a really smart approach. So thank you. Really great project.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Jan's project, the Canada Goose Origin game. Also really awesome and impressive. I mean, I just said wow so many times looking at all of your projects. So great work. You probably hear this a lot, that it reminds me of Untitled Goose Game. I'm sure you've looked at Untitled Goose Game, and it's kind of like a more thoughtful Untitled Goose Game, which I love. You know, I mean, a lot of people love Untitled Goose Game, and I think we do need more games that are less violent and that are cute and that are like from a cute animal's perspective. But you're bringing to it what's missing from that game. Because frankly, Untitled Goose Game held my attention for like 5 minutes. And your project, I think, is really fascinating in many dimensions. So thinking about the interspecies interaction between humans and the animals that we spend our lives with, I think is a really important direction. That's ultimately the direction that I would encourage or ask about for you to keep going in. I really appreciate the metaphor of thinking about geese as people that, as animals that were migratory, but that are now an integrated part of society. That's a really interesting metaphor there. I also really appreciate and think is important the local New York context adds a lot of value to the story or in the narrative you're telling. The narrative design was very carefully done, and it was just great, really well done, thinking about the 3 components of it across those 3 levels of your game. I love the nesting idea. I think that there's so much richness in the concept of nesting, especially as we're all forced to be in our homes right now and do a lot of nesting, maybe, hopefully. There's a really beautiful book called Edges and Fray, which I forget the author's name, but it's right over there on my shelf. That's all about thinking about nesting as a metaphor for poetry and philosophy. And I'll grab that title after this. So I was really impressed overall. I guess the main question that I have is, thinking about Donna Haraway and When Species Meet, her book, When Species Meet, I think a question that she's asking a lot in that book, or centrally asking, is what can we learn from interspecies relations and interspecies communication and interactions that we couldn't learn any otherwise? So what can we learn from geese in particular is my question. How can you take that perspective of the goose, and go even farther with it in terms of the interspecies collaboration? I think Natalie Jeremijenko is a great artist who's also in New York, I think at NYU, who writes a lot and makes a lot of artwork in this interspecies collaboration mode, who would be a good person to look at. But yeah, really great work. And I'm going to grab that book for that name and put it in the chat. Thank you all so much.
Amazing. Thank you, Micha. Okay, now if any of the students want to respond to her questions, feel free to do so. And we can also start taking some questions from the chat. Yeah, you can respond first.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the feedback, Micha. I did really think of the questions that you asked. So during my process, so at first I started off focusing on millennials and Gen Z, and then I started off with doing this intervention inside a gym, because a lot of beginners who start out at the gym feel it's an overwhelming experience to see all the machines and a lot of people working out over there. So I wanted this system to be like an intermediary system where people can learn about doing exercises in an effective way, and then move on to the weight section or the machine section. So that's where I thought maybe like personal trainers would be really helpful for people who have health complications. But whereas this system, I'm focusing on who are in good health condition, but they actually want to get started in muscle training or muscle growth or body or weightlifting, things like that. So hence, my age group, I targeted my age group as around 18 to 35. But again, because of this COVID situation, like there's a lot of requirement for in-house experience, in-house system. So I thought I could modify this experience to be had something like an in-house product where people could just follow the exercises and do it effectively without the need of an external trainer or external help. But overall, yeah, both the cases are kind of considered in case the requirement for gym comes up. This would also be helpful.
We have a question from the chat here. Colleen asked Yue, have you thought of different ways your project is impacted by quarantine?
Yes, I think I was because we are not allowed to explore the city freely at this moment. So I was thinking, for example, projecting Google Earth on the wall or on the fabric, and then use Snailor to navigate into different places by clicking Google Earth's button, trying to do this virtual journey. So it won't focus too much on we don't have to go outside, but still can give an opportunity to know the city more. But I think the idealist way to use it is still going outside, because there's so much details that we cannot see on virtual or online.
Thanks, Yue.
Okay.
Thank you, Colleen.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody that presented. Thank you to our guest moderator, Dr. Micha,